Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark DeVoe, and we'd like to say welcome. If this is the first time you've heard this podcast, we'd like to welcome you to the family, to all our experiments, all writing along. But we'd also like to say a big thank you to all of our patrons and Academy members from the Bestseller Academy for supporting this podcast and making it show up every week to keep bringing you what is now 460 odd episodes, Mark. It's kind of insane, isn't it, really, when you stand back and look at it? But if you would like to be one of that merry crew that supports the podcast, if you get any kind of value from us, please consider popping along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Or if you'd like to join the Academy, we are opening up the doors today. So if you would like to come and apply for the Academy to start in September, the doors are now open. Please form an orderly queue. And you can do that by going to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. So Mark, how has your exceptionally long week been this week?
It's been full of words. I've been loving. I'm still in that lovely first draft land where anything is possible. Draftland, yeah, that place we discussed a few weeks ago. It's a lovely place. I love it there. Edit land is a bit more rocky. I get lost a bit more there, but first draftland is great because
don't like the postman in Edit land, do you?
No, but no, it's great. It's all good, and I've. It's just finding. I do wish there were a few more hours in the day, but I'm not going to complain. I won't complain.
Yeah, it is a struggle, isn't it? In fact, when we did a survey once, the number one reason that we discovered why people have not written that book that they know they need to write is time. Finding the time, and even that phrase, finding the time. There is no time to find. It's 24 hours, that's all you got, folks. And when you actually knock off whatever amount of time you have to sleep a day, which for me, 7 hours, I think I kind of average out, and if I'm lucky, that can feel like a lion sometimes.
7 hours a day, another 8 at night.
Yeah, exactly right. That's my afternoon nap. But it is actually, I once did a little time study, and I was kind of blown away by of course I did, yeah. I did the spreadsheet, Mark, and I worked out how much by the time you take off sleep, plus what I call the chores of life being all the things we have to do just to stay alive, eat, sleep, drink, not sleep, but I've said that, but all the things we have to do we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, keeping a roof on your over you. And when you take all of those things and you look at what's left, it's a crazy tiny amount of time, which is why you have to be really, really, really precious with that time. And so a lot of the reasons why people have joined the Academy, as an example, and we found this thing about time, is that we make sure that they structure that time and get the most, they squeeze every drop out of that option to write. And that's where the books get written. It's in those little fragments during the day. If you're working full time, if you're a parent, if you're volunteering, if you've got a lot of other things you have to deal with, it's in those little fragments that the book does get written. So don't give up, folks. If you're kind of wondering how do you find the time, it's entirely possible. If you've got 15, 20 minutes a day, we've always talked about that, you can write a book. So keep on going. Now, Talking of writing books, Mark, we've got a wonderful guest this week. Tell us about Freya Berry.
Yeah, Freya Berry worked as a journalist at Reuters, and after a stint in New York reporting on the 2016 US election, can you imagine reporting
of all the elections?
What a roller coaster. Yeah, exactly.
That would have been a big one. Yeah.
After that, she left to write her first novel, The Dictator's Wife. There's a title after the 2016 election, anyway, which was published by Headline in 2022, and it was a smash hit. With her new novel, The Birdcage Library, Freya has ended up writing a love story and a detective mystery, which are two things she never planned to write. We discuss getting to know your characters like friends, writing about real people in the footnotes of history, and why Freya had to invent her own dictatorship.
Brilliant. Let's dive in and listen to Mark chatting with the well-travelled and inspirational Freya Berry.
Freya Berry, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment podcast. How are you today?
Very well, thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me on.
Our absolute pleasure. And you got this amazing new novel, The Birdcage Library. And I saw you tweet something the other day. You said, once at a writing workshop years ago, we were asked to jot down the two genres we thought we'd never try to write. I said love story and detective novel. Well, it turns out The Birdcage Library is both. So how did you end up writing something you thought you never would?
Yeah, ill-advisedly, maybe. No, it kind of made me think, and wasn't something that I set out to do deliberately. But when I was putting together the idea for the Birdcage Library, what I like with books is I heard once, if you set out to write a story about a man who takes his dog for a walk, and you end up writing that story, well, that would be a boring story, but you've actually failed because the story has not changed.
Yes.
The idea that you started with has not developed in any way. And so I started writing the Birdcage Library. It wasn't meant to be a detective novel. It wasn't really meant to be a love story. And somehow both of those things kind of made their way in, sort of elbowed their way in. And I thought, okay, this is happening. Let's just sort of go with it. And those are the moments where it's exciting, where being a writer, when you feel the story sort of come alive in your hands, I think you have to listen to those moments and pay attention, follow them.
Yes.
Hopefully they won't lead you too far astray.
Well, it does feel very familiar. There will often come a moment, usually halfway through a first draft, where I go, oh, that's what it's about.
Exactly. Now I know. Damn it. Now I have to go and reverse engineer everything else. Yes, exactly. I know it well.
You can either fight it or go with it. What's also fascinating with this novel is you've got two perspectives. You've got Emily and Hester, and they're characters who are 50 years apart, which sounds like a long time. But I turned 50 recently, so I'm saying it's not. So it does feel like the blink of an eye. What were the challenges in writing those two time periods, those two timelines?
Well, I swiftly realized too late that doing a dual timeline novel, particularly a historical one, is sort of double the research for the same amount of output. So that was a great realization. No, it was really fun in that. So part of it is set in 1930s Britain, in Scotland, mostly a Scottish castle. And part of it is set in 1880s New York, so the Gilded Age, which is just such a fun era. And what I liked about it was, I used to be a journalist, so I think I take a relatively journalistic approach to research. I read up on it all. You have to sort of get the feel of the period under your fingertips almost. So reading fiction, but also a lot of nonfiction, whether that's J.B. Priestley for the 30s or Edith Wharton for the 1880s, but also like the memoirs of P.T. Barnum, for example, who the Gilded Age period is very much about exotic animals. Hester, my character, is married to an exotic animal dealer. So getting that really sort of into my mind so I could have it at my fingertips was fun. And then you want to take that, or I did try to do this and find what's similar about these very different periods. The darkness beneath the spectacle that lies under the Gilded Age, that the hungry 30s, they're called, from the 1930s perspective, finding out what's making each period tick and where are the sort of comparisons that you can draw between them.
Those two very different headspaces to get into as well. Were you writing the 1930s sections in one go and then doing the 1880s sections, or were you alternating and having to reconfigure your headspace while you were doing that? How much of a nightmare was that?
Yeah, so I wasn't above Googling how to write a dual timeline novel. I did that. And basically the answer is there is no way, of course, as with everything in writing. Figure it out yourself, really. No, that's not quite true. I looked at it and thought, actually, for me, I like to begin at the beginning and end at the end and see what, because that leaves for me the possibility of those meanderings we talked about. So I started with just as a brief summary, the Birdcage Library follows these two women, Emily Blackwood in the 1930s and Hester in the 1880s. Emily is called to a Scottish castle. She's an adventuress, kind of on the skids financially, and she discovers this old book, which contains clues which lead her to the diaries of Hester Vogel hidden in the castle for decades. And so she kind of sets out on this treasure hunt and to find the successive diaries and work out what happened to Hester, who disappeared. So, and Hester is the wife of this exotic animal dealer. and has kind of entered this gilded cage of marriage, I suppose. And so I started with Emily's and then just wrote Hester's when it felt like she had entered the story. But then inevitably, after I'd sort of written the thing, there was a lot of shuffling bits around after the fact and then painfully reverse engineering things. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. You mentioned the setting there. Is it Eileen Donnan, which is this amazing windswept castle? I saw a video of you up there recently. Obviously, it always pays dividends to go to a location if you can. What were the sort of surprises you discovered when researching there?
Yeah, so Eileen Donnan was definitely one of the inspirations. The setting of that castle is beautiful. It's been used in James Bond, for crying out loud. It's got this causeway going over the loch. It's perfect. I also spoke to a couple of other castle lairds who were talking about, how the wind was so strong sometimes you can even open the front door. So based it on several different castles, but yeah. So the interesting thing about writing this novel, particularly versus The Dictator's Wife, where I did which was my first novel, where I did a lot of research for it, getting out there, traveling to Eastern Europe where it's set and speaking to people. This one I wrote mostly during COVID, right? And so it was kind of anathema to me to not be able to go to, say, Tring Museum for the large majority of the time while I was writing. Tring Museum is the Natural History Museum's bird collection, where that's kept, and is sort of seen in the book, or the setting of it. And so a lot of it was book bound. It felt strange to be writing a book about an explorer while I was unable to go anywhere. And frustrating. So it was, a lot of reading, a lot of actually speaking to my mother, who went to Papua New Guinea, where Emily has just been as the story opens. Just sort of swatting up, I suppose, with online research and books. So yeah, it was slightly frustrating, but then I guess also it was a different way of getting into the story, which I think ultimately worked in the end.
And you mentioned there's a treasure hunt there. This is very much a kind, as you say, a detective story. What were the challenges in writing a detective story, which readers would expect twists and turns and revelations? Is that sort of thing you'd, as you say, you'd never expected to write one? So what were the big challenges there?
Yeah, sort of every single bit about it was challenging, to be honest, because you never know how clever you're really being, because obviously the whole point of the detective novel is to sort of pull the wool over the reader's eyes at strategic points. I'm a big fan of Agatha Christie. To add to the pressure, the 1930s is kind of the golden age of detective fiction, so that's kind of intimidating as well. So I read, I read a lot of Christie anyway, but also, those early detective novels, which kind of I'd never heard of before. The Leavenworth case, Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White, okay, more famous. Revelations of a Lady Detective, which I highly recommend for if you like your female heroines sort of carrying a revolver scandalously, sort of written in the 1860s. It's great. And so, it was about getting those clues right. It took a long time in terms of working out what the framework of that is. It involves a lot more sort of tight plotting. You have to be really disciplined. You can't just wander into it, which is something I like to do. And the rest of the other elements of the book, it was a lot of I'm writing this down, planning it. What are the steps that lead us to this point? So you have to pay attention. Can't be asleep at the wheel.
Definitely, most definitely. You mentioned The Dictator's Wife there, and you mentioned the research. Now, as I understand it, because you worked in a newsroom, but to research Dictator's Wife, you actually went to Eastern Europe for 3 months of research and you went to Romania and immediately found yourself in the middle of a street protest. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was totally unplanned. Well, I mean, not going to Romania, I'd obviously booked the ticket, but so The Dictator's Wife is set in an unnamed Eastern European country, but at the end of the Cold War and the coming down of the Berlin Wall, and that country is heavily based on Romania. So I booked myself a ticket to Bucharest, one-way ticket, just sort of was going to see where that led me, with no real plans, no real money either. I'd left my job to give myself a year to write. I don't know what I was doing. I was 25 and an idiot. So I pitched up in Bucharest, and it was sort of about 9 p.m. at night. I got this Airbnb host I was staying with for a few days. And as I was heading to the apartment, I just noticed there were quite a lot of police around, but I thought, well, I don't know, Bucharest, who knows? And he was a bit late arriving, said, I'm so sorry, I've just been at the protest. And I was like, what protest? he was like, did you not see the police cars? I was like, yeah. And so he said, would you like to come? And I literally was like, okay. So put my bags down, went out and walked into the biggest protest that they'd had since 1989. And there is a protest scene in the novel, which was very much lifted from that. And they were protesting against this, very corrupt new government law that they were bringing in. And so 300,000 people in a square, chanting the Romanian for thieves. And we all got tear gassed. And then I was swept off by my new friends, taken to an underground bar in an abandoned palace. This is all within like an hour of 2 hours of landing. I don't know how it happened. But I went to a few more protests, and for successive nights became quite a sort of crusader for Romanian justice briefly. And it was fantastic. It was like I could not have, obviously, it was a difficult time for the Romanians. But from my perspective, selfishly as a writer, I couldn't have asked for a more immersive start to writing a novel and researching it. And yeah, it's quite a spicy way.
Wowzers, that is the last time I complain about a taxi picking me up late from the airport or whatever, puts it into perspective. But the Dictator's Wife has a brilliant premise, which is, investigating the woman behind the power, if you like. And very often through history, these dictators' wives, they're often just reduced to a joke, like Imelda Marcos with her shoes. But obviously, readers, novelists, we want more. So with is it Marija Popper, the Black Widow, in that? You
yes.
Definitely delivered. Was it a case of kind of sympathy for the devil, or finding humanity in an anti-heroine? How did you go about that?
Yeah, it was sympathy for the devil is a great way to put it. So I'm just fascinated by these women. I've been as a journalist, I've just been reporting on the 2016 US election, and I've been watching Melania Trump. I was living in New York to cover that story, and I was just so fascinated by her sort of Sphinx-like enigma. And of course, she's not technically a dictator's wife, but this sort of idea grew out of that. And, as you say, people like Imelda Marcos, Asma al-Assad, these people who are kind of footnotes in history, right? Or, a ssort of brief reference in the chapter of this dictator's life. But, if you think about who, I'm married, you think about your relationship with your spouse, they're a huge influence in your life. And I don't think it's any different when you're a world leader. And so I wanted to sort of go behind the scenes and, as you say, create an anti-heroine. It was important to me that she wasn't a villain. It was important to me that the ambiguity was at the heart of the story, because that is what is fascinating. Pure evil is boring, like the banality of evil, fine. But also she obviously couldn't be the good guy, morally speaking. And so I wanted to create someone where you're continually dancing on the shard of doubt. You feel her influence everywhere, but she herself is kind of nowhere. And Laura, my lawyer protagonist, spends the entire novel trying to figure out what she is. And I don't know if she answers that question. I kind of wanted the reader to answer that for themselves. And yeah, I think it's so interesting to have that ambivalence, that ambiguity is something that really I'm passionate about.
Yes, absolutely. You can't. It's like, the book is very much just like taking a journey with someone, and at the end you are very much left to decide for yourself, which is a bold choice to make, because I think the easy way out is to come down one way or the other and go, that's where I stand. And particularly when you're dealing with people who they know these terrible things go on, and they still get up in the morning and go about their day. So, but also for this book, you said it's sort of based on Romania, but you essentially invented an entire nation. Is it Yanusia? And it's so how do you go about creating a sort of a believable Eastern European dictatorship?
Yeah, it's I felt I kind of had to do it first off, because I didn't feel right taking an actual country and rewriting their history. That felt and also conveniently, when you make up a country and someone gets in touch to say, oh well, this is not how the Romanians do it or whatever, then you can say, well, actually, not that anyone has done that yet, but matter of time, I'm sure. But it was fascinating. I guess the mood is really important to me, and the themes that I want to put across. So I read Jan Morris talking about Moscow, famous travel writer, saying the thing about Moscow is the truth. It slithers away from you in the snow and is obscured by the footfalls of passing armies. And I love that sense of you can't get to grips. You don't know what is true. Obviously, Cold War, Iron Curtain, secret police, that paranoia, that suspicion, reading people like Herta Müller, who won, I think, the Nobel Prize, Romanian writer. And, I wanted to bring about that, when Laura arrives, everything is coated in fog, and that really had to be the, metaphorical entry point into the country. So yeah, setting that was a matter of sort of gleaning tidbits from real countries, and then sort of scaffolding that with what I'd seen in Eastern Europe, my travels, and then trying to push it from there. Janusio is named for the Roman god Janus, sort of looking east and west. So I wanted that sense of in-betweenness, not quite knowing where you are.
Excellent stuff. Now, on this podcast, we're obsessed with journeys of writers and writing habits. Now, you mentioned there at 25, you decided to take a year out and write The Dictator's Wife. I mean, you studied English at Trinity College. This was always on the cards, was it? Was this always part of the plan, or?
No, not at all, actually. I think I was determined to go and become company's news editor at Reuters, which shows how much I knew about myself at 21. So no, I always thought I wanted to be a journalist. I think in retrospect, that's because, I just had no idea how to become a novelist. I liked writing. But what I really liked was reading, and this journalism seemed like the obvious way to go into something that was words adjacent, I guess. But yeah, the thing about journalism, obviously in retrospect, is it's about truth and about facts and about finding things out. And I kind of slowly realized that I wanted something more creative, and that was where I was finding fulfillment. And so I had been writing. I've been trying to write after about a couple of years, writing sort of before work, after work, on weekends, not very well, certainly. And then I decided to really take the plunge with this year out, which was a very indulgent thing to do. And I was very lucky to be able to do it. I had some savings, but I lived at home for a while, all of this stuff. And then sort of gave it a go. And I think it was very helpful. I don't think you need to do it to quit your job. I wouldn't necessarily advise doing it. But it was very helpful for me personally to just be like, I'm doing this, and I'm going to write, 500 words a day at the start. And by the end, I was doing sort of 4,000 words a day over that 4-month period of writing that first draft. And now, it's something that I can do without forcing myself. No, I still have to force myself to do it. Yeah, that's not true at all.
We can relate. So that's interesting. So you were starting with about, 500 words a day, and then getting sort of almost like accelerating as you went along. Is that the normal process for you?
Not now. So this is while I was all in Eastern Europe. I was writing and traveling, and I would spend towards the end increasing amounts of time in one place just writing. And now I would say I'm more of a steady pace. I try and do about 1,000 words, 1,500 words a day if it's going well. But you forget that so much of writing is editing as well, and that's very unsatisfactory because there isn't a word count to sort of. Often the word count is decreased by the end of the day, which is
so even worse. Minus numbers, yes.
Exactly. So it's sort of very frustrating that, like, I do this amount of words a day, and then actually, 2/3 of the year you're spending, taking those words out. So.
So what's coming next from you, Freya? I mean, is there anything else on your list of things that you never thought you'd write that you're suddenly discovering that you're writing, or?
So I'm developing the idea for my third novel as we speak, and I'm trying to be ambitious at this point. Is sort of first book, you don't know if you can write a book at all. It feels like just getting to the end is a massive achievement, which it is 100% is. Second book, you're still thinking, but really, can I do this? Was this a fluke? I'm hoping two now means that it's not a fluke. I can do this. So now I'm trying to push the envelope, and a lot of your sort of writing process, a lot of the last couple of years has been realizing that just because I'm sitting at a desk typing doesn't really mean that I'm writing. So much of writing is going for long walks and thinking, like that ideas development is so invaluable. Like, when you're in the shower, there's little ideas that pop out when you're not really thinking. So much of my day now is spent trying to get into that space of like half focus. It's like at the same time and really intense focus, and also your mind is relaxed, and it's very hard to push away all the pressings on your time. So yes, at the moment I'm very much trying to live in that space as much as possible, and plan that out and start about writing that in the next couple of months.
And is there anything you bring across from your journalism that helps you as a writer?
Yeah, good question. So a lot. When well, as you say, I graduated, I did English literature, so came out writing these, beautiful flowery sentences, and everything was metaphorical, and it was all so pretty. And then I sort of got to Reuters, which their style is, not dry, but factual, to the point. And my editor was like, no, none of this. Who, what, why, when, put it in there at the top. Don't get overexcited. And so definitely that my definite tendency is to overwrite still. And so I'm trying to always hearing my editor in my ear, strong Scottish brogue, quite an angry Scottish brogue, which is kind of so good and bad to have in your ear. Yeah, so trying to simplify that, but also trying to get the feel of something. With the journalism, you have very short space of time and space to get your reader there. So bringing that up, making it tangible. Why does it matter? I think is really helpful.
And I think I've caught you at an interesting stage, because as you said, you're in that kind of thinking space where ideas are starting to accrete and come together. How do you keep note of those? Do you have like a notebook, a document? Is there some way that you keep track of these ideas without letting them drift off on the ether?
Yeah, so I have so many beautiful notebooks which I never use. So I'm just I've got these random scraps of A4 because inevitably when I do have an idea, I never have any notebooks with me. But what I really use is the Notes app on my phone, because I always have my phone on me, and so I write it down, and I say to myself, I will remember this, of course. And when I get to my pretty notebook, I'll write it down. No, and it'll never happen. It'll go. So yes, I keep track of that, and then I'll sort of, when I'm putting an idea really together, really laying the cables for that, I'll go back through that and see if I've just been talking rubbish this whole time.
Yeah, I know the feeling. And now you've got 2 books under your belt, and you're preparing for the third. What are the biggest lessons that you learned from those 2 books that you're going to carry forward to this third one?
Yeah, there's so many things. And I just, when I came to writing, I didn't know any novelists. I didn't know anyone who was doing this. And it's such a scary thing from the outside to be like, I can't do this. Who are all these people who know how to do it? Do they have powers? Like, like how are they doing this? And I'm not saying now one of those, sort of anointed people at all, but it's, it is work out. You can work it out. And you can do it, but it does feel like you're at the bottom of the mountain. And so not looking too far ahead, I think, is really important. Not, just that blank page, like starting my second book, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this again. So taking it step by step, word by word, sentence by sentence, just starting, I think, is really important. Getting to that state of half focus I already talked about in terms of developing your ideas, very important. Spending time with your characters. There's these character templates you can get online, like what color are eyes, like what cake do they like, whatever. And those can be kind of, I find them incredibly boring, actually. And I realized that when I was trying, when I tried to do that, that actually this wasn't coming alive in my hands. And it's about spending time with those characters and sort of like meeting them as you would a friend, almost, which I find really helpful. But also COVID, people said, oh, it's great, all these novels are going to come out of COVID because no one has anything else to do. COVID was actually terrible for me anyway, as a writer, because, I'm a great believer in getting out there and seeing random things, and that being your inspiration, reading different books, seeing films that you wouldn't necessarily see, noticing things on the street. And if you're in your room, there's no external influences. So my sort of mentor, and if you can get a writing mentor, I really recommend it. My mentor, Piers Caforde, he's a fantastic children's writer. I was saying to him once, this idea, the more I work on this book, the worse it's getting. And he said, you're wringing out the dishcloth, and every time you're getting less. You get out there and read things, watch things, just live your life a little bit, and relax into that state where you're receptive again to ideas and you feel that freshness. So I think that's really important. And then other things I've picked up, making it worse, like you sort of got to abuse your characters a bit. So if they've got if their cousins died, no, make it their mum, make it their husband. What how can you double down on that, and making it true as well. If you're going to say something, then say it like, how can you get to the essential truth of what you're trying to say? How can you push it? How can you push it deeper? How can you push further into yourself until you're sort of hurting yourself by doing that? And that's what makes writing so exhausting, but so exhilarating, I think.
Excellent advice. Now, I've got to dial back there. We love Piers Torday. He's been on the podcast. He's an amazing man. How do you get Piers Torday as your writing mentor?
That was my husband's aunt knows him. So and he very kindly, very, very kindly agreed to have a drink with me and has just been fantastic ever since then. So you don't need a top-selling children's writer to be your mentor, I should say. Although, he's been great.
Doesn't hurt.
Just anyone who's done this before in any sense will do. So just someone to encourage you, really. That's
absolutely. Well, listeners, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can listen to that episode, and Piers can be your mentor for that half an hour or so. But Freya, this has been absolutely fantastic. Folks, Dictator's Wife, Birdcage Library, they're out there now. Grab them now. And Freya, we hope to speak to you again real soon.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks for having me on. A pleasure.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. So, Mark, what to unpack? I've got to say, a little bit jealous. Traveling and traveling around visiting castles, that's got to be a lot of fun. Well, in the guise of writing a book.
Yeah, and we talked last week about being a writer opens doors. And the Monty Python castles as well. So I'm jealous about that. I do need to go and sit, because I think Doune Castle was in the Holy Grail. But yeah, terrific. It's great stuff. And like I say, there's a lovely tweet of Freya sort of talking in front of the castle, and it brings it all to life. Really does.
It does bring up this idea, though, that you can dream a bit as an author, can't you? I think every author should have a bucket list of all the places in the world they'd love to visit, with the excuse that they might slip it into one of their books. But I mean, because when you think about just going on holiday, you just let's pick a location. Where do we want to go? But picking something historical or something which I once went to Turkey, and we visited Ephesus, which was just this unbelievable. It was a whole city that they discovered underground, and they just basically excavate the whole city. And I was only about 12 at the time, and I remember standing in the amphitheatre at Ephesus going, this is bonkers. And I kept thinking, who was the bloke that was or the person who was digging up the first ever, and they found something, and they kept digging and they kept digging and digging and digging. So it gives you an appreciation for life and history and what's preceded us and nature.
It totally fires up the imagination. And it doesn't mean you have to go to the far end of the world either. You could just getting out and just today I was down in Folkestone, driving around Folkestone, and it's such a remarkable landscape. There are big chalk cliffs and everything just up the road from Dover, and winding paths, and you get inspired by wherever you go. Just up the road here, in a place called Reculver, there used to be a Roman fort, and the wall is still there. So I wrote a short story about, the fact that Caesar might have walked through my back garden. You don't have to travel to the other side of the world. There's inspiration everywhere you go.
Well, I used to live in Cambridge, and I used to just sometimes wander around, see, inside of like King's College and some of the cobbled streets of Cambridge. And I had that thought. I used to think to myself, who else walked down these streets, and all the incredible people that studied there and came up with amazing inventions, and pubs where they discovered the DNA helix, all that stuff. Yeah. But I think it's a question of just we've talked about having your sort of story radar on as you go about your day, because there's always opportunities just overhearing conversations, seeing what people do in a particular situation, whatever, and the streets that you walk down or drive down or whatever. I mean, one of the things I remember when I was at Iran, we did a book about dieting, and they said a lot about dieting is just restructuring the way that you think. And one of the things they suggested was taking a slightly different route to work every day. So because I used to walk from, say, Waterloo Station to work, and I started mixing it up. I started taking different routes, and you start noticing different things and hearing different things, and it fires off the synapses, So have that radar on all the time if you can. That's great. Yeah. Now, if you've ever gone on holiday, or you've traveled somewhere, or you've had a radar open, you've seen something that inspired a book, we want to hear about that. Like drop us a note and tell us about something that you maybe when you were traveling and you saw something. Or have you ever traveled specifically to research something that became either absolutely key in your book or was a massive disappointment? You planned the whole holiday around the travel, and it's like, this is just, I'm not going to use this at all. But we'd love to hear from you, because it'd be fun to banter around that. Now, one of the other things that Freya mentioned was this idea of how important it is just to start.
Yeah, well, it's the tricky bit. It's the really tricky bit. I mean, finishing is hard, but just starting, moving that boulder. And, we welcome new listeners at the beginning of this. And if you are new and thinking of writing a novel, there's no better way to start than just writing 200 words a day, every day, and just, nudging it along every day. And then you'd be amazed at how quickly it builds momentum. But also, if you've been through the process of writing a novel, coming back to the start is just as intimidating, if not more so, because what's ahead of you. There's the first draft, there's the second draft, there's giving it to beta readers, there's giving it to editors and the copy edit and the proofread and everything, all those hoops you have to jump through in order to get through it. But yeah, just starting is a big win, an absolute big win. And it's something, we celebrate in the Academy as well, So just, and it's, I start with a notebook. That's what I start with. And I will just start scribbling. I know people get very precious about notebooks, and they think, I'm almost too scared to put the words down. Get in there, make an absolute bloody mess. Just scribble everything down, do whatever. Yeah.
I actually have a new notebook, Mark. This is my current project notebook for the new book. And one thing I decided to do, I was going to do a bullet journal. I thought, no, I better use lined for this, is I made a point of every single time I write, leaving a good chunky part of the margin free for me to scribble stuff in. And I found that's been really useful, because so anyone using a notebook, like leave an inch on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the page, obviously of left page, right page. And then you can scribble all your notes in, which I find super useful, because that's the problem I always had before. I'd want to scribble little things in. There just wasn't the space to do it. Do you have any techniques like that with your notebooks, Mark?
No, just make it up right old mess. Post-it notes. I use a lot of post-it notes if I have to go back or there's something I want to come back to. I mean, the difference is you're working in non-fiction, aren't you? And I think you need to refer back to stuff. Whereas the way I work with the notebook is I will start by going, okay, what's happening today? And I will literally write that down. And what was this character doing when we last saw him?
It's almost like a journaling of the writing process.
I get into a headspace, and then I start writing the scene or an outline of the scene, and then I type it up. And I'm always moving forward. I'm never looking back, because it all gets typed up into the Scrivener document. And if there are notes, then they go into Scriv, which is searchable. So
do you do that immediately after you've written the notes? Like, do you do the note writing, the handwritten notes, and then the writing up of the notes in one session? Typically,
it depends on the session. So today I did that. So there was one particular chunk, because I've started on quite a substantial action set piece, which I know I'm not going to get done in a day. I'm going to have to do it in little bite-sized chunks. So I did the first chunk where we're encountering our character for the first time and things start to go wrong. Just that first phase. So I just thought, I'm going to concentrate. I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to get inside the headspace of this character, figure out what they're thinking, and then things start going wrong. And I thought that's a good place to stop. And I reckon I had about 45 minutes left of my session, so I just started typing it up. So most of the time, that's how I work. Sometimes I'll do a massive load of handwritten stuff and then type it up the next day. And when I say type it up, I'm adapting it.
Distilling it, yeah. It's almost like the next draft of it.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting because Freya said so much of writing is actually about editing. But she also said that it's not as satisfactory as word count. But we have a solution for that, don't we? Because in the academy, we've got a whole course on editing. And one of the big tips, which we will give you today, is this idea you create yourself instead of a word count goal, you create yourself a page goal on a daily basis or a weekly basis. Daily basis is better because it's easier to chunk it down. But, 3 pages of editing a day. It gives you something to aim for. It breaks up the slog. I mean, I find we've interviewed a lot of authors, obviously, over the years, and we discovered that editing is something that authors absolutely love or they absolutely hate. There's very few in the middle that are like, yeah, it's all right. It's the Marmite effect, isn't it? It splits the audience. So anyone doing that, create an edit page goal, I think will really help you on a daily basis. Definitely something to look at. The other thing that Freya mentioned was the idea of getting a writing mentor. Now she got an amazing mentor. I mean, how she pulled that rabbit out the bag.
Amazing, yeah,
right?
Fantastic, yeah.
But I think it's very important that we talk about why a writing mentor is essential, especially if you're an indie author. You might not have an editor to work with, especially if you're not collaborating. Like we talked last week, collaborating with another writer that kind of acts as a bit of a cheerleader and mentor for you as well. But for people that are there just on their own, not having anyone to just talk about what you're experiencing, to get get a bit of feedback, to just explain the challenges that you're going through. It's 90% of the challenge, I think, of writing when you're doing that on your own. So getting a mentor is absolutely essential, isn't it?
I wish I had one when I started out, but luckily I worked in publishing, so I could sit down with authors and go, okay, so what's that about? Tell me about
like
that.
Rotating mentors in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the greatest school ever, I think. So I was able to ask authors who'd been around for a long time, and they give me their experiences and what they've been through, which was really helpful. Which is why I in the academy and in the BXP group, and I do like, if anyone's got a question, there's no such thing as a stupid question. I'm more than happy to share what I've been through, and
it's partly why the academy was set up as well, because there is this total vacuum where people are really scared to go out and ask someone, and maybe they don't even know anyone that they can go talk to.
Publishing's really bad at this as well.
Yes.
It's although interestingly, I noticed that Orion, our friend Sam Eads at Orion and Trapeze, has set up what they've called an academy for authors who sign up with them. So they're getting authors in to sort of give talks and lectures about the publishing process and what it's all like. So it's interesting to see that publishers, I think HarperCollins are doing something similar, not an academy like our academy, but basically when you join, because when I was at Hachette, they did a thing called the author portal, which was you'd log in and it would say, okay, this is what a copy edit is. This is where your books are printed, all that kind of thing. It didn't last, sadly. They shut it down after about a year. But hopefully this one will last. But publishing knows it's very bad at this kind of thing. It kind of assumes you've had a grounding in how traditional publishing works. And of course, most authors haven't got a Scooby.
Yeah, well, that's why in the academy we have like a kind of a roadmap which people can dive into wherever they're at in the journey, whether they're starting out or whether they're halfway through a novel, whether they've published a few. I think it's really good. So if you want, I'm just saying out there, folks, if you want ready-made mentors, if you enjoy this podcast and you want Mark and I to help support you through your writing journey, then sign up to the academy. Like, come and apply today, because this is what you get. You get myself as the life coach, and you get Mark as the craft coach. And between the two of us, we kind of like work on all different angles of everything that you're experiencing. And being writers ourselves, we also understand really understand.
Share your pain.
Right, exactly, which you need. And actually, that's the importance of a mentor. I would never recommend finding a mentor that hasn't done what you're about to or currently embarking upon, because that's the whole point. That's the difference between a mentor and a coach. There's a lot of coaches that have never actually done the thing they're coaching in. I mean, I coach only in the areas that I've done stuff in, because I feel that's really important to have that personal experience. But don't go and find a mentor who talks a good game, but they haven't actually lived it, because they don't have the actual emotional and physical experience of going through that. So
you know what's really bad for that? Screenwriting. The number of screenwriting courses that are run by people who've never had a film made. I can't, it's astonishing. Yeah,
it is, right?
So just
interesting. Just saying, folks. So
be aware.
academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. You know where it is. All right, folks. So in the extended edition of today's podcast, we are going to talk about the first book, the 3-book rule, I should say. What happens during the process of, it's not just about the first book. There's a 3-book rule we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about this idea that Freya mentioned around half focus. I love this idea of half focus. Like, it's not necessarily sitting down to write. There's a lot of other things you've been doing. We're going to talk a little about the who, what, why, when rule. And also, Mark's going to dive deep into writing anti-heroes. Dun, dun, dun. So do not miss that, folks. So if you would like to join us for the extended, just pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support, sign up as a patron. And obviously, if you're part of the Academy, you get all those as well as part of the membership there. So, Mark, what's happening on the wins this week?
We got some public declarations to start with. So over on the BXP team, we got a couple. Naomi Floyd. She says, I've been hovering in the background long enough. I'm stepping out my comfort zone and risking a declaration. The first draft of The Lady Before, which is her take on Lady Macbeth's backstory. Now, we were talking about anti-heroes in the extended version. I mean, Lady Macbeth, the ultimate anti-hero. I think she's fantastic. Naomi wants to get that completed by the end of July. No pressure. Any support most gratefully accepted. Well, Naomi has the support of everyone in the BXP team over on Facebook. So good luck with that, Naomi. And Lynn Clark, who has been on the Academy as well, as has Naomi, actually. They're both Academy members. Following on from other public declarations, she says, I've been splashing this all over my socials. I guess that means I should actually edit the book properly instead of making lovely splashes. Now, Lynn has been experimenting with cover art. She writes under the name Jocelyn Sordoni, and this is book 1 of the Awesome Chronicles, How to Breathe Underwater, which I got to dip into, so to speak, in the Academy, and it's terrific YA fantasy. It's just terrific.
Did it make you hold your breath, Mark?
It did. It did. It made my heart beat faster, made me hold my breath. All the stuff that good fiction does. So yeah, she's made an official declaration. Christmas 2023 is going to be done. So fingers crossed there, Lynn. It's in the diary. I will be in touch closer to the time.
Fantastic.
Phil Oddie, we've got a lovely Phil Oddie has been one of the people on the 200 word a day challenge who's been regularly logging, and we've been sort of chatting on Twitter and what have you. He's had a brilliant blog on how the 200 words a day challenge has changed his writing habits and helped him finish a draft and make him feel like he can finally call himself a writer. It's really inspirational stuff. I'm going to put a link in the show notes so you can check that out, folks, because it's a really good blog.
Thank you to Phil for writing that as well, because I read the article and it was like absolutely lovely to hear just the incredible difference that it made in his writing life. I mean, it's brilliant. So thank you for taking the time to write that blog about it, Phil. That was brilliant.
Now, something we don't talk about a lot, because it is unofficial, we got the Unofficial Bestseller Experiment Book Club, which is a group over on Facebook, and Steve Gowland runs it. And I think every month now, he's interviewing members of the BXP team about their books. And the most recent one was with Morgan Delaney, whose book, The Squared Circle, is just such a blast. Absolute, really, really good fun. And Morgan is a great interview as well. So I'm going to there is a link in the show notes to the Unofficial Bestseller Experiment Book Club, where these are all sort of stored away. So these are really good, enlightening interviews. So do check those out as well. Over on the Academy, we've got Karen's Story. Now, Karen's Story is just such such a boon to the Academy, because she's really inspirational. She's been entering all these short story competitions, and she says, like buses, you wait ages for competition results to come along, and then two arrive at once. This one, she's got a couple. One from the Oval competition, congratulating her on making the long list for a short memoir piece, shortlisted at the end of the month. And then she's got a long listing email from the Farnham Flash fiction competition. I mean, this is just, this is just this thing of putting yourself out there constantly, entering competitions, getting some kind of, just giving yourself these mini deadlines, these constrictions. I know so many authors really, really thrive on this. So congratulations again, Karen. This is just
absolutely brilliant, and more power to you as well. I think you're absolutely right, Mark. I think it's good. It's really good to do these things, and also, like we saw with some of the Academy members, when they get their first shortlist, long list, or even win, the thing that does to their confidence is absolutely huge. So if you're a writer that's struggling with confidence, then consider entering a few short story competitions. It's just a great way to get your feet under the table and to build up all that belief in yourself, which, we've always talked about this in the podcast. It's probably the most important thing you can develop.
And last but by no means least, lovely unboxing from Sarah Moorhead, who's a member of the BXP team. We've had her on the podcast before. Sarah, of course, was a teacher. She taught Stuart Turton, that brilliant author. We had a great episode with the two of them. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. But she's just been unboxing her new book, The Treatment, which has a stunning cover, absolutely stunning cover. And we are getting Sarah back on the podcast later in the year when that comes out. So congrats on that, Sarah. Just great wins all around.
Brilliant
well done,
stuff.
everyone.
And thank you so much, everyone, for sharing those wins. And if you have any wins you'd like to share, then where do they go to do that, Mark?
Come and find us online. We're at bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there where you can drop us a line. Or on social media, we are Bestseller Experiment on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. We are at BestsellerXP. And we're probably going to be on Meta Threads as well by the time this comes out. So again, there'll be links in the show notes to look us up.
Brilliant stuff. And if you'd like to join the 200-word challenge, it's simply 200wordchallenge.com. If you'd like to join the Bestseller Experiment newsletter, get a weekly update with thousands of other fellow experiments, pop along to the website, bestsellerexperiment.com, and click on the newsletter tab. And a quick reminder, folks, as well, if you're coming to the end of this podcast, you stuck with us, thank you so much. If the Academy is of interest to you, the doors are open now. So pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com and put your application in for the beginning of September. So, Mr. State, I hope you have a fantastic week. Happy summer to you. We're off camping soon. I'm really looking forward to that. Oh, it's just, and what I'm going to bring with me? I'm going to bring the Ken Follett book, The World's End. It's like the follow-up to the mega one I read last year camping. But it's so big, I've decided I'm going to use it for twofold. One for chilling out, relaxing in the hammock, and one for swatting the bears if they try and poke their head in the tents, because they're everywhere. Seriously, there are bears everywhere right now. In fact, weirdly enough, whilst we did this podcast, I've been watching, obviously paying attention, but out my window, I've been seeing bald eagles battling with ravens.
Wow.
It happens every year in our back garden. Bald eagles trying to steal the ravens' young, and the ravens that are like massive, but a bald eagle's like huge. Ravens chase. There's like 2 or 3 ravens chasing, and it's a whole cacophony of noise. You could probably even pick it up if you listen really carefully to the podcast, because I don't know if my mic was picking up. But yeah, the craziest of stuff that happens out. We're talking about getting out in nature.
It's really weird, because just today I saw a murder of crows. About 30 crows all taking off at once, and it was like something from a horror. It was like something from the Crow Folk. Yeah. It was like, whoa, that's like an omen or something. It's terrific. Yeah. So there you go.
The stuff that goes on whilst you're recording this podcast, you have no idea, folks. Brilliant. Well, listen, whatever you're doing this week, make sure you have a great writing week. Get some words down, and we can't wait to bring you another episode next week. So it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
Bye.